Let's dive right into this explainer with the fierce, absolute defiance of a mother and a queen. I shall not surrender my jhansi. It's one of those quotes that just echoes through history. It perfectly captures that exact moment when an unstoppable imperial force met a completely immovable local ruler. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring how a single, honestly, kinda dry bureaucratic British policy stripped a young boy of his birthright and ended up igniting this absolutely legendary historical epic. We're gonna look at the life, the battles, and the enduring legacy of Rani Lakshmi Bai, the Queen of Jhansi. So, we'll examine the facts, the staggering numbers, and the really incredible personal journeys of the key figures who defined the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The Doctrine of Lax.
To really understand all the bloodshed that followed, we actually have to start by looking at a piece of paperwork, the Doctrine of Lapse. Under Governor-General Lord Dalhousie, this doctrine completely threw out the window the long-established Indian right for a sovereign to just, choose and adopt a successor. Instead, if a ruler died without a natural male heir, the East India Company just abolished their princely status entirely and annexed the territory. And by mostly claiming that the current ruler wasn't ruling properly, the company used this policy to add roughly £4 million to its annual revenue. That is a massive sum.
So this brings us directly to Jhansi. Back in 1853, Maharaja Gangadhar Rao was dying. The day before he passed away, he and his wife adopted his young cousin, renaming him Damodar Rao. Now, the adoption was done formally, right in the presence of a British political officer, along with a letter instructing that the child be treated with respect and that the government be handed over to his widow. But the British applied the doctrine of lapse anyway. They completely rejected the young boy's claim to the throne, annexed the state, and ordered the widowed Rani to pack up and leave her palace and the fort on an annual pension of 60,000 rupees.
Section 2. Rise of the Queen. Now, what really primed the Rani for the massive resistance that was about to unfold was her incredibly unique background. Born Manikarnika Tambe in Varanasi in 1835, she had a childhood that was completely unlike most women of her era. Her father was actually a commander of war under the Peshwa. Because of this, she was educated at home, she learned to read and write, and most crucially for our story, her studies included shooting, horsemanship, and fencing. These were highly unorthodox skills for a young woman at the time, but they turned out to be the exact skills that would soon transform her from an exiled widow into a genuinely formidable military leader. When she was formally informed of the annexation, she definitely didn't just quietly accept her pension. No way. She famously cried out, "Main apni jhansi kabhi nahi dungi," which translates to, "I shall not surrender my jhansi." And while she did initially live quietly among the civilians, everything changed when the massive 1857 uprising erupted across India and mutineers took over Jhansi. Right in the middle of all that chaos, she boldly stepped up as a regent for her minor son. She reasserted Jhansi's independence and organized a massive army of 20,000 troops, even going so far as to train local women to fight. Section 3. The Siege of Jhansi. Okay, so by early 1858, Jhansi was an independent stronghold once again. Naturally, the British weren't going to let that stand, so they organized a military expedition led by Sir Hugh Rose to crush the rebellion. When the Rani flat out refused to surrender, the claustrophobic tension just skyrocketed. Let's look at how this played out. On March 24th, the British begin a relentless artillery bombardment of the city walls. The defenders fight back fiercely, returning fire with heavy cannons right from the fort. Then, on April 1st, there's this sudden glimmer of hope. The legendary rebel commander Tantia Tope arrives with 20,000 men to relieve the city. But at the Battle of Betwa, despite literally setting the dry forest on fire to stall the British, Tope's forces are defeated and forced to retreat. Things get really grim. By April 3rd, the British breach the city gates, which leads to absolutely brutal street fighting. And finally, on April 5th, the fort is abandoned. The sheer human cost of this siege was just horrific. To put it in perspective, 343 British soldiers were killed or wounded, while an estimated 5,000 Indian defenders and civilians lost their lives. Facing certain capture, the Rani made a desperate nighttime escape. Legend actually has it that she jumped straight from the fort walls on her horse, Sarangi, with young Damodar Rao strapped tightly to her back. And while the horse tragically perished in the fall, the queen and her son survived, slipping right through the British lines under the cover of darkness. It's like something straight out of an action movie.
Section 4. Allies and the Aftermath.
You see, the fall of Jhansi wasn't the end. It actually sparked a desperate, sprawling guerrilla campaign across central India that ultimately determined the fates of all our key figures. Rani Lakshmi Bai pushed on to capture Gwalior,
but she was tragically martyred in battle on June 17, 1858. She actually chose to immolate herself just to avoid capture and humiliation by the British. Meanwhile, Tantia Tope frustrated British generals for months, evading capture for a staggering 2,800 miles across hills and dense forests. But sadly, he was eventually betrayed by an ally and executed in 1859. And what about Damodar Rao, the young boy at the very center of the original succession crisis? Well, he fled into the jungles, living in dire poverty and constant fear. 7. Just think about that for a second. That is the total number of followers Prince Damodar Rao was allowed to keep after he finally surrendered to the British. He was sent to Indore, placed under the guardianship of a teacher to learn English and Urdu, and handed a pretty meager pension. So the boy who was literally supposed to be the Maharaja of Jhansi ended up living out the rest of his days quietly. He actually developed a really deep passion for photography, living until his death in 1906 at the age of 56.
Section 5. An enduring legacy. So yes, historically and mathematically, the British crushed the 1857 rebellion. But, as we know, history isn't just about who physically holds the territory. Her story completely refused to be buried. It created a cultural legacy that was even catapulted right into the 21st century with the 2019 blockbuster film Manikarnika, the Queen of Jhansi. I mean, it was a massive global spectacle releasing on 3,700 screens across 50 different countries. It won Kangana Ranaut a National Film Award for Best Actress, and even became the highest Indian opener in Japan in early 2020.
Roughly 133 crore rupees. To put that into perspective, that is what a resistance fought with literal swords and cannons back in the 1850s managed to generate at the modern global box office. It perfectly emphasizes the sheer, unyielding scale of her legacy. The public's fascination with her absolute courage hasn't diminished in over a century and a half. If anything, it has grown exponentially. We're going to leave you today with this astonishing diary entry. And the crazy part? It doesn't come from her allies. It comes from Sir Hugh Rose, the very British general tasked with hunting her down and defeating her. He wrote, "She was the most dangerous of all rebel leaders, best and bravest of all, the only man among mutineers." It really prompts us to ask a profound question, doesn't it? When the dust finally settles, and your fiercest enemy remembers you as the bravest of them all, who truly won the war?